They set the line at dusk, and they tied it off, and they went to sleep, and by morning they were gone. That is how the story usually started, when there was anyone left to tell it. A man would come upon a camp, the fire cold, the gear still laid out, and the man who made the camp nowhere. Just a wet trail in the mud leading down to the river, and the end of a fishing line still tied to a stake or a wrist or a belt loop, and the river running on the way it always runs, keeping what it took and saying nothing about it. The line was still there, the man was not. And if you understood the old ways well enough, the story told itself without a word. I want to talk about this because it is one of the quietest ways the mountains killed, and because it is almost completely forgotten. We think of the old mountain men dying in the dramatic ways, the bear, the blizzard, the fall from the cliff. But the river at night, with a line in the water, took more of them than people want to believe. And it took them in a way that was so simple, so ordinary, so completely tied to the plain act of trying to eat, that it should trouble anyone who has ever fished alone in wild country after dark. Here's what they did, and why they did it. A mountain man camped on water whenever he could, because water meant everything. It meant drink, it meant a trail to follow, it meant game coming down to the banks, and it meant fish. Fish were the easy food, the reliable food, the food a man could take without a shot, without alerting every ear in the country, without spending powder he could not replace. And the best fishing, the kind that filled a man's belly with the least effort, was the nightline. You set it in the evening, baited it heavy, tied it off to something solid, and you went to sleep, and the river did the work while you rested. By morning, if the water was good, there would be something on that line, and a man had his breakfast without lifting a finger. It was simple, and it was smart, and the old-timers did it all the time, and for most of them, most nights, it worked exactly as it was supposed to. But some nights it did not, and on those nights, it killed them. The first problem was the simplest and the most deadly. A man ties his line to his own body. I know how that sounds, and you are already shaking your head, but you have to understand the why of it before you judge. The mountain man had very little gear, and he could not afford to lose any of it. A fishing line was precious. The hooks were precious. They were things that could not easily be replaced in the deep backcountry. So a man who was afraid the current might pull his stake, or who did not trust the knot to hold against a big fish, would loop the line around his wrist, or tie it to his belt, figuring he would feel the tug and wake up and deal with it. He was turning himself into the anchor. And that worked fine when the thing on the other end was a trout or a small catfish, something he could overpower in his sleep if he had to. But the rivers in that country held things that were not small. Channel cats that went 60, 70 pounds, sturgeon in some waters that weighed more than the man. And when one of those took the bait in the dead black middle of the night, and the line went tight, and the full weight and panic of that animal hit the end of the cord, the man was no longer the fisherman. He was the thing being caught. Picture it. You are asleep on the bank, wrapped in your blanket. The fire burned down to coals, and something enormous takes your bait 20 feet out in the current. The line snaps tight against your wrist with a force that jerks you half upright before you are even awake. You do not know what is happening. You are tangled in your blanket. It is pitch dark. There is a monstrous pull on your arm dragging you toward the water, and your feet are scrabbling in the mud, and you cannot see, and you cannot think, and the cold water is suddenly at your boots, your knees, your waist, and the thing on the other end does not stop pulling. By the time your mind clears enough to understand that you need to cut the line or untie it, you are in the river. And the river at night is not the river you waded in the daytime. It is black and fast and freezing, and you cannot touch the bottom, and the current has you now, along with whatever is on the other end of that line. And a man in heavy clothes, in cold water in the dark, with one arm tethered to a panicking animal, has about as much chance as you think he does. The cold is what finished most of them, the ones the current did not simply swallow whole. A man pulled into a mountain river at night in the cold months loses his body in minutes. The water does not have to be deep. It does not have to be fast. It only has to be cold, and mountain rivers are cold the way iron is hard, completely and without exception, even in the summer. And in the winter they are a kind of cold that stops a man's muscles and his breathing and his heart in an order so fast he barely has time to understand he is dying. The old-timers knew this about the river in the daytime. They respected it, they crossed it carefully, they treated it like the danger it was. But at night, in their sleep, with the line on their wrist, they had handed themselves to the river without meaning to, and the river took what it was given. Even the men who did not tie the line to their body were not safe. And this is the part that gets lost. A man ties his line to a stake driven into the bank, or to a root, or to a heavy stone, and he figures he is clear of it. The line is the river's problem now, not his. But a big fish on a staked line makes a tremendous commotion. It thrashes and it rolls and it fights, and the sound of it carries through the night, and the man wakes up hearing what sounds like his whole breakfast trying to tear free, and he goes down to the water in the dark to secure it. Barefoot, half-dressed, half asleep, he goes stumbling down a muddy bank toward a river he cannot see to grab a line that is jerking and snapping with the weight of something powerful on the other end. His foot hits the slick clay of the bank and goes out from under him. Or he grabs the line, and the fish surges and pulls him off balance. Or he wades in just ankle deep to get a better hold, and the current finds his footing and moves it out from under him. And ankle deep is suddenly chest deep because the bottom dropped away, and he did not know it in the dark. The men who were careful enough not to tie the line to themselves were still drawn down to the water by it, still lured to the bank in the worst possible conditions, blind and cold and careless with sleep. And the river does not need much of an invitation. An inch of bad footing on a slick bank at night is all it takes, and the man is in the water, and the water is in charge. There is a thing about rivers at night that the old men understood and that we, with our headlamps and our camp lights, have mostly forgotten. A river in the dark is a completely different creature than a river in the day. You cannot read it. You cannot see the fast water, the rocks, the holes, the sweepers, the logs jammed beneath the surface that pin a man and hold him under. In the daylight, a man looks at a river and his eyes do half the work of keeping him alive, showing him where to step and where to stay clear. At night, all of that is gone. The river is a sound and a blackness and a coldness and nothing more, and a man in it is as blind as if he had been buried. The old-timers who fell in at night could not swim to safety because they could not see safety. They could not avoid the killing features of the water because the killing features were invisible. They were in the grip of something they could not see and could not read and could not predict. And the cold was taking their strength with every second, and the dark was taking their direction. And by the time they understood how much trouble they were in, most of them were past the point where understanding could save them, and the weight of their clothing. This is a thing we forget entirely, and it killed them as surely as the current did. A mountain man did not sleep in light pajamas. He slept in wool and leather and canvas, heavy stuff, the same clothes he wore all day, because the nights were cold and a man needed the warmth. When that clothing hit the water, it soaked through in seconds and became a kind of anchor, dragging at every limb, pulling the man down, making every stroke and every kick cost 3 times the effort it should. A man who could swim fine in his skin could not swim at all in 60 pounds of soaked wool and leather, and many of them could not swim well to begin with, because swimming was not a skill the mountains demanded often, and the ones who had come from dry country had never learned. So the river got a man who was cold, blind, clothed in his own weight, possibly still tied to a fish, and could not swim, and it is a wonder that any of them survived at all. Some did, the ones who kept their knife close and cut the line fast, the ones who had the sense to roll onto their back and let the current carry them feet first until they could grab something solid, the ones who were lucky enough to fall in where the water was slow and shallow. But many did not, and they were found downstream in the days or weeks that followed, or they were never found at all. The old wise ones learned from this the way they learned from everything, by counting the dead and adjusting. The rules they made for themselves were plain. Never tie the line to your body. Never. No piece of fish is worth your life, and a line on your wrist in the dark is a leash held by the river. Stake the line hard and leave it alone until daylight, and if you lose the fish in the night, you lose the fish, and you are alive to catch another in the morning. Never go down to the water in the dark. Whatever is on that line can wait. The sound of a fish fighting in the night is not an emergency. It is a temptation, and the man who resists it lives, and the man who answers it is rolling the dice with the river in the dark, and camp far enough back from the bank that a man stumbling in the night cannot simply wander into the water without meaning to. Because men did that too, half asleep, confused, walking the wrong direction from the dead fire, and the bank was right there, and so was the river, and so was the cold, and the dark, and the dying. There is another part to this that I have not told you yet, and it is about what happened to the man who went into the river and somehow came back out. Because surviving the fall was not the end of the danger. It was often just the trade of one death for a slower one. A man pulled out of a mountain river in the cold is soaking wet, shaking so hard he cannot control his own hands, and his fire has been left behind on the bank, or is out, or is too far to reach. Hypothermia does not wait. It does not give a man time to collect himself. It starts the moment the cold water hits his skin, and it accelerates the moment the air hits his wet clothing. And in the mountain night air, a soaked man can go from shivering to confused to unconscious in less time than it would take him to build a fire, even if his hands worked, which they do not, because the cold has already taken his fine motor control, and he cannot grip his flint, and he cannot hold his knife, and he cannot strike a spark. The river did not have to drown him. It only had to wet him, and the night air would finish the work at its own unhurried pace. The old-timers who survived these nights, the rare ones, did it by preparation they had made long before the emergency. They kept a second fire kit, dry, sealed, separate from the one in their main camp, often strapped to their body under the outer layer where even a plunge in the river could not soak it through. They knew that if they ever went into the water, the first and only thing that mattered was fire, and they had to be able to make it with numb hands in the dark on soaked ground, which meant having dry tinder ready, having it where they could find it by feel alone, and having practiced the motions so many times that their muscles could do it when their brain was shutting down from the cold. That preparation saved lives. But most men did not prepare that way, because most men did not believe the river would take them. They had set their lines 100 nights and woken to fish in the morning and nothing had gone wrong. And 100 safe nights is a powerful lie that whispers you are immune. They were not immune. They were lucky. And the night the luck turned, they were soaking wet in the freezing dark with no way to make fire, and no way to get warm, and no one coming to help. I have not spoken of the river itself rising, and I must, because this killed men who had done nothing wrong at all, who had not tied the line to their body, who had not gone down to the water in the dark, who had simply gone to sleep too close to a river that was not done changing for the night. Mountain rivers rise. They rise fast, sometimes in the dark, from rain that fell miles upstream that a man never even saw. A man makes his camp on a nice flat bank 10 feet from the water line and goes to sleep in the dry, and 3 hours later the river is in his camp, in his blankets, pulling at his gear and his body, and he wakes up not to a fishing line pulling him in, but to the river itself coming to get him, cold and dark and rising and everywhere at once. The old-timers called it the flash, and they feared it more than almost anything, because it came without warning, and it came in the dark, and a man asleep on a low bank had no chance at all if the water decided to move. The fishing line was almost a secondary danger beside this one, but the two were married, because the line was the reason a man camped on the water in the first place, right up close where the fishing was easy, and the bank was flat, and the river could reach him. A man who fished kept his camp on the river. A man who kept his camp on the river was a man the river could visit in the night. And the river visited when it pleased, not when the man was ready. The smart ones, the ones who lived long, they learned to read the river the way they read the sky. They looked upstream, and they looked at the clouds, and they felt the air, and they knew, before they ever laid their head down, whether the water might come up in the night. They camped high when the signs were bad, up on the bluff or the bench above the flood line, and they ran their fishing lines long and downhill to the water so they could fish without sleeping beside the thing that could swallow them. And on the nights when the sky was clear and the river low and everything seemed safe, even then they kept a part of their mind on the sound of the water as they slept, listening for the change in its voice that meant it was rising, the deeper roar, the different rhythm, the sound of debris moving that had not been moving before. A man who could hear the river change in his sleep and wake and move before the water reached him was a man who had made his peace with the truth of it, which was that the river was never safe and sleeping beside it was always a gamble, and the only question was how carefully you managed the bet. The deepest lesson in the fishing line is the same one the bear trap teaches, the same one the campfire teaches, the same one every story from the old mountains comes back to in the end. The things that feed you can kill you. The river that gave a man fish every morning was the same river that took men every season. The line that put breakfast on the bank was the same line that pulled men off it. And the moment a man stopped seeing the danger inside the gift, the moment he treated the river as a friend and the line as a harmless convenience, that was the moment the water started counting down the nights until it got him. The old-timers did not hate the river. They ate from it gratefully every day they could. But they never turned their back on it, and they never tied themselves to it, and they never went down to meet it in the dark. They understood that the river was not generous, and it was not cruel. It was simply the river, and it would take anything it could reach, and a man's only job was to make sure it could not reach him. The men who remembered that ate well and slept dry and grew old. The men who forgot it were found in the spring, downstream, still tangled in the line that was supposed to feed them, taken by the very thing that had kept them alive every other night of their lives.